All right, great. Well, thank you all for having me. Excited to be joining. So I'm Brad. I'm one of the co-founders at Unstoppable Domains. Here to talk about traditional versus decentralized DNS. So first of all, what's wrong with traditional DNS? What's wrong with the traditional web? The core thing is that companies and governments decide what can be said online and who can say it. The technology enables them to decide. And so there's a few pieces to this. One piece are the domain registrars. And domain registrars, like GoDaddy and many others, are mandatory custodians of your domain names. So there's a whole bunch of cases of registrars taking away domains from users or getting hacked and making it so you're unable to access your domains. But there's an interesting trend that I wanted to call out, which is cases where the registrar is acting on behalf of some sort of political motive. And so in Libya, the .ly registry, which is primarily administered and sold by nick.ly, started taking down websites or restricting access to domains that were being used for things that were considered morally inappropriate. And so this continued actually for several years, one extreme case, but there are many, many more around the world. Another piece are domain registries themselves. So for example, .com is a domain registry owned by VeriSign. And what is interesting about that is VeriSign is a US-based company. People use .com websites all around the world. And because of that, the US government gets to essentially have jurisdiction over behavior that has nothing to do, that did not happen on US soil and has nothing to do with US citizens. You could have a .com website somewhere around the world, and you could be doing something that does not involve American citizens in any way. But because of the fact that .com is controlled by a US company, means that websites, domains are seizable anywhere around the world. And there's kind of all kinds of wacky cases that have happened, but there was one relatively recently where this guy in the 1990s bought France.com. And then the French government wanted it back, or not back, wanted it for themselves. And they wound up having an extended legal battle over it, and the registry essentially reassigned it. Another crazy case is during the Catalonian independence movement in Spain, a registry called .cat that was being used by a lot of websites organizing people around the independence movement was shut down. So the entire registry was raided. The company was raided. The employees were arrested, and the registry went down entirely. And so this illustrates the problem with the way that current domain registries work, because they have this vulnerability. So that's registrars, registries, and now there's one more. There's hosting services. And so in the case of hosting services, those companies can take your content offline entirely. It's not just off of their platform. If you get kicked off of Amazon Web Services or whatever other hosting service that you might be using, it's that you actually disappear from the internet, at least temporarily. So this is a pretty big deal in terms of your ability to publish. And there's a whole bunch of cases where hosting services are also being used as points of censorship around the world. One kind of crazy case is that the Turkish government passed a law that bans 138 words. 138 words cannot be posted on any website that is hosted in the country. And one of those words is gay, and another one of those words is naked. So once again, you see a case around the world where morality is being enforced through web tools, registrars, registries, and hosting services. So how is decentralized DNS an alternative? Well, decentralized DNS is an alternative because domains are stored by the user in their cryptocurrency wallet. This is a completely different architecture that puts the user in control, and then the user can write records to their domain name, and the user gets to decide what goes up and what goes down. And so if you have a blockchain registry instead of a traditional domain registry, you would launch that on a public blockchain, and the domain names themselves would not be revocable by the registry. So it means that the vulnerability becomes, does somebody get access to your private key? If you control your private key completely, then you also control your domain name, and therefore you control any content that is hosted there. In the case of a blockchain registrar, these would really just be front-end applications. They wouldn't take custody of your domain. They would just be an application that would help you write records to your domain name in order to update your website, etc. And then for decentralized hosting, your website content would be stored on a peer-to-peer storage network. I know there's been a lot of talk here about IPFS, and there's a lot of really exciting stuff that's happening on IPFS right now, where you're seeing websites get launched already. So website content being stored on a peer-to-peer storage network where you have hundreds or thousands of different people all storing a copy of your website or a piece of the file, give you protection against the takedowns that could exist through a hosting service like Amazon Web Services or others around the world. So that's the idea, is that you take the architecture that exists today around DNS and IP addresses, helping you locate content sitting on private servers or company-controlled servers. You move that to a system where you're reading a blockchain, and then you're finding an associated record that is sitting on a decentralized storage network. And so if you have a blockchain domain and you have peer-to-peer storage, you now have a decentralized website. And this doesn't require any DNS servers because browsers are able to read the blockchain to find a website record. So this is a very different architecture than exists today, where you would be going and there's essentially a group of people that manage DNS servers. It is a contract, I believe, and it's associated with ICANN, which manages the current DNS system. And what happens is there's a set of servers, of canonical servers, that show the records, and then you're able to go and access those records. But they are sitting on private servers. And if you replace that with a blockchain, then what you would get is browsers or any other apps or even any individual would be able to simply query the blockchain in order to find a record. So that is much more secure and extremely open and accessible to anyone in the world. So this is a very different system with very different security guarantees. So who would actually need a decentralized website today? I think this is a pretty important question for the crypto and the decentralized web community to ask themselves. And I think that one answer is blockchain applications. And blockchain applications want to ensure that their users are able to interact with a blockchain without having a company in the middle. They want to be able to provide software, but not have to provide your security, that you can rely on the blockchain for your security. Well, a decentralized website, a decentralized DNS would allow users to do that even for front-end applications. Whereas right now, if you have a wallet or some other application that is enabling users to interact directly with a blockchain, then you have this problem where that application has to have a domain name and a set of servers somewhere, and those things can be taken down. Those things can be stopped, and it can ultimately block the user's access to the application that they're relying on in order to interact with the blockchain. Now, of course, if you have your your private keys saved, you don't. If you have your your passphrases saved, etc., it doesn't mean that you lose your funds, but it does mean that you lose access, at least temporarily, and that's something that a decentralized website would be able to prevent. And that could be especially valuable if you're doing any kind of uh, time sensitive thing. Let's say you have a lending some sort of a lending contract that you need to satisfy within a specific timeline. So there'd be a reason why you would want to make sure that you don't ever lose access to a blockchain app. Another category is blockchain content creators. And this is one that you may have seen very recently. There were cases where YouTube has been taking down content associated with blockchains and cryptocurrencies. And there have been, I think, dozens of channels over the past year that have been taken down or suspended. They're typically taken down or suspended without warning. They're typically done without any clarity on what rules or policies were violated, if any at all. And in most cases, the channels were simply turned back on until some future date when they might get turned off again. And that's just one case, one platform. There have been cases of crypto content creators having issues on other platforms. Twitter accounts have been going down as well recently. And what this tells you is that if you are working in or you are trying to contribute to the crypto space, the blockchain space, and that is controversial, just the fact that the industry itself is trying to do such revolutionary things is sometimes threatening or restricted, depending on where you are. And it is happening in the US as well, where those activities are getting restricted. It means that there is a strong value in having access to a decentralized website where you can put up your content or your videos or whatever, and you can prevent companies or governments from shutting you off simply by calling up the domain provider that you might be using or the hosting provider that you might be using and switching you off. And that can happen oftentimes without due process. Another category are free speech activists. And this one I think is a lot more obvious, but around the world, there are a lot of places where if you were to publish a blog or you were to publish other content that was critical of powerful people, that content would go down. That content would be taken off the internet. And the people that facilitated the posting of that content would be sanctioned. And they would be identifiable through the domain registration process. If you have a decentralized website and you acquire a domain name and put it in your wallet, you can act pseudo-anonymously on the internet using blockchains. But you can also, even if your goal is not to be private, you are able to publish in a way that can't be taken down, even by you in some cases. So there's an idea of what maybe extreme publishing could look like in the future, where somebody publishes a specific piece of content and then burns their private key so that not even they can turn it off in the future. It would just be there on decentralized storage networks. So these are kind of short-term, who are the groups of people that absolutely need it because the current internet just can't function for them and can't function for what they need. Eventually, I think it's fair to say that everyone will want to use the decentralized web once it's cheaper and better, faster than the traditional one, and that may be many years in the future. But there's no reason why that it can't ultimately replace what the current hosting services are doing for us and the current domain name systems are doing for us. There's no reason why you can't have better versions of those things, plus all kinds of new opportunities using a decentralized web. So how do you view decentralized websites? Well, there's a few ways. There's some DWeb-focused browsers that are popping up more and more, as well as some larger browsers that are paying attention to this. There's browser extensions. You can always get a browser extension. There's many of them. And then DNS resolvers are another access point. And more and more tools are being built over the coming years in order to make it easier for the decentralized web to be usable and used by people almost in the same way as they would the traditional web. So that's it. We're Unstoppable Domains. We're onboarding users to the decentralized web. And if you're building any tools for IPFS or launching websites on IPFS, let's talk about how we can work together. Thanks, everybody. So there's a question in here about how much it costs to keep a website. So the marketplaces for decentralized hosting don't yet exist, but I think they're going to exist quite soon. There's a few things that are happening in the very near future. One is the launch of Filecoin, which is to be used in order to pay for hosting. And so this is going to be an emergent thing. How much does it cost? But I think kind of, bigger picture, it should have better economics than traditional hosting, because you're able to access people's available space anywhere in the world. You're able to access, essentially a marketplace of that, rather than having to go to like one specific company and saying, how much are you going to charge me for server space in your particular server farms? You can just go post to anyone in the world and say, hey, here's what I would like to store. How much do you want to charge me? So I think in that way, it'll wind up being ultimately a lot cheaper, although there's also this redundancy. You want to be paying multiple nodes in order to store it. So there's added cost maybe from multiple nodes, decreased costs from this kind of open marketplace, and all of that is the economics of that will shake out over the course of years. It's an interesting question, though. Any structure for the decentralized domains? I'm not exactly sure what you mean by structure, but there are some domain registries that are out there in the wild. We created one called .crypto, which has a couple hundred thousand domain registration. I'm sorry, a little over 100,000 domain registrations. So there's registries that you can look at out there in the market, if that's what you mean. And then what you're doing is you are writing text fields to your domain name. So like my IPFS hash equals this, my cryptocurrency address equals that, my decentralized chat ID equals something else, things like that. So the next question is, what kind of client would be needed to resolve the name just stored on IPFS? And so what you would need to do is you would need to do a lookup on the blockchain. So you would need to read whatever blockchain the registry, the registry domain name is on, in order to find the IPFS hash. So that's what you would do. And then in terms of serving up the website, you would need to have an IPFS node running. I think in an ideal world, the way this would work is you would have a browser that would go and look up on the blockchain for you, and the browser would have a decentralized storage node, like an IPFS node inside of it, and then that would allow you to be able to serve up the content in a way that was nice and clean, just a very basic user experience, similar to what you would get from the traditional web. So that's the dream state. People are using gateways and things like that in the interim, but ideally you would have, you would run your own node, or you would have your browser have a node inside of it. So another question here, which is, can I host traditional applications, or can I only host static websites? So right now, it is hard to do anything other than static, front end applications. If you need to call, if you need to do any kind of back end, then there's not really the infrastructure to do that yet, although there's a lot of people working on it. And I think that I think that if you were to just map what's been happening in the decentralized web world over the past couple of years, I think 2018 there was a lot of experimental stuff. There was a lot of tinkering. 2019 maybe a bit more tinkering. 2020 we started to see browsers supporting this stuff. We saw a couple of decentralized search engines launch. We've seen tens of thousands of new decentralized websites go live, including decentralized exchanges, wallets, a whole bunch of other things like that. So I think we're at the beginning of the wave. And so where we're at is people are now finally starting to be able to easily launch front-end applications, easily visit those front-end applications and get users for those things. And then the kind of the phase where we get to the back end is probably going to be a later phase, and hopefully soon. So the other question is, how do you deal with scalability or changing of IP location? So I think scalability is a problem just across the blockchain ecosystem. I mean, ultimately, we are not building blockchains. We're building on top of blockchains, which means that we need to rely on blockchains to be able to handle the necessary load. But the nice thing is that domain names are not transferred super frequently. So once issued, maybe you would make updates to them semi-regularly, but you wouldn't transfer them all that often. So it doesn't require a huge amount of resources to do it. And then in terms of changing of IP location, I'm assuming you mean just updating your domain name. Yeah, you're just sending a message with your private key, and you're writing a new IPFS hash or whatever decentralized storage network you're using. Hashed to the blockchain, and that's it. Then browsers use that to look up the domain name and find your website content.